on, folks. Hold on.
You sure you want to do this?
Sit close to the window.
You're really sure?
There we go. Here. Oh, yes. Did I say that out loud?
All right.
How was that, folks? Did you get wet? No.
So let me tell you about this very interesting vessel of ours. These are not an old military redesign like you see driving on the streets like the Boston dock was. By the way, I mean the buildings were full of asbestos, the grounds are saturated with chemicals and heavy metals and solvents, as you might expect. But it's almost like its own little 40-foot boat or something of that similar size for very short money, way less than that studio apartment would cost you. And the marinas supply electricity and water hookups as well as Wi-Fi. So you might wonder then why this marina over to our right is empty. Well, it's really kind of a sad story because when the Navy Yard was being converted to civilian use, a multi-millionaire bought this. He bought this, the rights to a marina. He built the marina, but he took shortcuts, and then he never put a penny back into it. These steel pilings, they're supposed to be filled with concrete and steel reinforcement. They're hollow. The very last dock on the outer edge here, last week, there were 5 or 6 pilings. They started to lean over like the one at the very end you're going to start to see coming into view. They were leaning over so far at low tide, they lifted the dock about 3 feet out of the water. Last year, the city of Boston, the Attorney General, closed it down after warning this guy many, many times to improve it. Became a safety hazard. Yeah, there's a little lobster boat off to our left here. Oh yeah? He's probably going to win. That's a faster model.
So the skyscrapers in front of us, that's old Boston. Everything else was water. All the way down to your right.
That movie, I borrowed a movie from Richie, was filmed in 1960 here in Boston. The old Custom House Tower, the one with the pointy roof, that was the only tall building around. You couldn't see anything else other than the Old North Church.
That was 6 bridges to cross. Anybody ever see that? That was filmed in 1955. That's also about the bridge robbery with Tony Curtis and Sal Mineo. Also, what's interesting, if you don't mind, is Sammy Davis Jr. said we're coming to Boston to sing the song 6 Bridges to Cross. Because Boston originally had 6 bridges. Got in a car accident, loses his life.
Oh, is that right? Oh, I didn't know that. Coast Guard
Angry Housewives.
And yeah, I've seen that show, The Angry Housewives of New Jersey. I'm not going there. No way. There's Boulder on the end of Pier number 4. You see that big boulder? That was left by a retreating glacier about 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, it might not have been left on the end of that dock, but it was left somewhere. So, interestingly, that's a birthday present to Senator Ted Kennedy when he turned 80 years old. He was considered the rock of the community, so we gave him a rock. What else can you give a guy who has everything else?
Yeah. A bigger rock.
Now, there's an old naval ship in front of us. You know, during the Second World War, get this, 50,000 people worked at this shipyard. My dad was one of them. This is the style of ship that was built here. They were built for the British Navy as well as the American Navy, by the way, part of the Lend-Lease agreement. This particular one was built in San Pedro, California, but it's a Fletcher-class destroyer. This is a type of destroyer that was built here. It's named for Captain Cassin Young. I want to tell you his story real quick, and I'll tell you why in a minute. His ship was tied up next to the USS Arizona during the attack on Pearl Harbor. When Arizona exploded, the massive explosion that took down 1,100 Americans with her, Captain Young, he was manning an anti-aircraft gun on his own ship. His ship was hit by bombs at the same time as Arizona's explosion. He was blown over the side. The water's on fire with burning fuel. 30 or 40 guys trapped down below. They would have drowned had he not been able to run the ship up onto the beach. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions that day. And when he recovered, he was given command of the USS San Francisco, a heavy cruiser. And only 6 months after the battle at Pearl Harbor, he lost his life. His ship was engaged with a much larger Japanese battleship. So he only got to enjoy that Medal of Honor for about 6 months. 2 years ago, I had his granddaughter on board my duck boat. Wow. And I didn't know until the tour was over. She and her husband came up to me. She said, I wanted to thank you for talking about my grandfather. And she introduced herself, told me who he was. And she said, her husband, by the way, happened to be the captain of a U.S. guided missile frigate. So you can see how the Navy traditions in their family It was pretty cool. We had a nice talk. This particular ship was hit by Japanese kamikaze planes off of Okinawa in the latter days of the war in the South Pacific. Was able to survive that. And the flagship of the United States Navy, the oldest commissioned ship in the world still afloat, Old Ironsides, the USS Constitution. She earned that nickname. She was built here in Boston, as Richie said earlier. We sent 75 or 80 guys down to South Carolina and Georgia to harvest live oak trees. Live oak is extremely heavy, strong, dense wood. And that ship is 25 inches thick, more than 2 feet thick in her waterline, and about 21 inches thick throughout the rest of her hull. Cannonballs from the British ship Guerrier during the first naval battle of the War of 1812 were literally seen bouncing and ricocheting off her hull. The sailors cried out, "Her sides must be made of iron." The fact is, the United States was a new little country in 1794 when George Washington and Congress authorized the building of 6 American frigates at different shipyards along the East Coast. The shipbuilders were told, build our ships more ruggedly than the Europeans. We couldn't afford to keep replacing them. We were a tiny new country with a tiny little navy. These were really the first military ships. During the War of 1812, the British Admiralty eventually orders their own frigate captains, do not engage these American ships one-on-one. Wasn't fair. They didn't build their ships like we built ours. In fact, Constitution took on 2 British ships during a battle, defeated them both. During the battle, her helm, her steering station was shot away by a British cannonball. The Marines on board were ordered below decks to control the rudder with cables during the battle. Then when the battle was over, the ship's carpenter took a crew onto one of the British ships and removed her station, her helm station, the steering station, and installed it on Constitution. Got another nice view of the garden over there. Yes. The building to the left of it, by the way, will be the future headquarters for Converse Footwear, the sneaker maker. Now, that building was known as the Submarine Signal Building. That was where the first transatlantic cable was manufactured, the cable that connected America to Europe for the first time. Major project. I'm trying to remember what wharf they're going to call it. Lovejoy Wharf, I believe they're calling that.
That's been the name of it. Yeah. Everybody enjoying themselves?
Off to the right, where the baseball fields are, one of Boston's strangest disasters. We have to go back to January 17, 1919. The Great Molasses Flood. With the hangar retracted inside the ship, they can launch and retrieve it from the fantail. The second one is the USS Spencer. If you saw the movie The Perfect Storm, Spencer was the one that was sent out for search and rescue onto Georges Bank, October 1991, a massive storm here in New England. Only one of the local television meteorologists predicted what was happening, and he is still on the air, Harvey Landon, Channel 5. There were 3 big storm systems, and he said, it looks like these might come together, and if they do, we're in a lot of trouble. And they did, and we were. 90-foot waves were reported out on Georges Bank. 90-foot waves. That's probably as tall as the mast on that ship, if not maybe a little bit taller than that. And what kind of vessel do we have coming our way here? I don't know. That one served on Nantucket Shoals. Site of a very interesting naval disaster. Maritime disaster, really not a naval. The collision of the Italian liner Andrea Doria with the Swedish liner Stockholm. And the Andrea Doria sank in about 250, 300 feet of water. 50 people or so were killed in that. People still die on that wreck. They like to dive on it. It's a very nasty, heavy current area. People still like to dive on it. And every 5, 6, 7 years or so, you hear somebody losing their life out there diving on the wreck.
I think that today is a private vessel. It's the guy's home.
Yeah, I heard it might be getting converted to a museum. Yeah, there was a senator that owned it, a state senator. I think it was Golden.
Okay.
If you look onto the left, beyond where the barge is, you see a lot of green hills out there. The big one, just to the left of where that ferry's going out, that is Spectacle Island. And that's another fun thing to do on Boston Harbor. The Boston Harbor Islands are part of a national park system today. Spectacle Island, very nasty history. A quarantine station in the early days of the colony, a horse rendering plant at one time. somewhere in between, there were a couple of hotels out there with gambling, and they closed those down. But then it became a garbage dump for the city of Boston. Very nasty place. They condemned it in the 1960s. Fortunately for Boston, the National Park Service was starting to take control of the Harbor Islands about the same time as the Big Dig tunneling project. So we cleaned up that island, and then we covered it with 5 to 10 feet of fresh new dirt and clay from the tunneling project. We landscaped it, we planted it. It's beautiful out there today. The ferry that's leaving now, that's the Boston Harbor Islands ferry. $15 for adults, 10 for kids, something like that. The ticket includes water taxis. So if you go island hopping out in Boston Harbor on a day like this, beautiful. Really, really nice. There's a visitor center out there, 4 miles of hiking trails. Nice beach, a lot of sea glass. People like to collect it. They have signs that tell you not to, but you can stuff a few pieces in your wallet. You know? Not that I'm encouraging breaking the law.
Again, if you look to your left, you can see the Long Wharf Marine Hotel. See the front of it? Looks just like the ship. There and the side. Most of these big yachts that you see to your left, these are owned by corporations because it costs so much.
Looks like there's a ship leaving. You see the black and blue stack over there, just to the right of the building? Too bad we missed it. So believe it or not, for $350,000, $400,000, you don't get four-wheel drive. That's option package number 2. So we're going to drive our way up onto the ramp using the propeller. We do have 2 transmissions, one that's powering that, and then when you hear the prop freewheeling, it's about the same time that the rear wheels are touching down, and I'll disengage that and re-engage the road transmission.
Get stuck like you did the other day.
The duck has landed.
You look to your left, you see the building that says number 80. That's where they
Come on, huh?
Anybody ever see the movie Charlie with Cliff Robinson?